G'day. Welcome back to the Sports Medicine Project. Now, we apologise. We have been on hiatus, or I have been back teaching at the uni, semesters back. We've got some research projects happening, so that's taken up most of my time. And we have a couple of courses coming up towards the end of the year. So it's been spreading me thin, but we're back on our regular schedule. But none of that matters because today we're joined by Greg Lehman. Now, most of you will know who Greg is. If you haven't heard him on other podcasts or follow his social media, that is a worthwhile spend of your time. Trust me on that. But he's a physio, chiro, strength and conditioning specialist with a master's in spine biomechanics, teaches internationally. He's come over to Oz. Kelly and I did his 2-day course here in Newcastle, and he's got a couple of courses going. But if you go to his website, which I've tagged below, he's got Reconciling Biomechanics with Pain Science and the Running Resiliency. And Greg's approach, really no BS, straight approach to really healthcare is really refreshing, and it's practical. It makes a lot of sense, and he's pioneered probably a lot of my thinking. So I do thank him for that, and it was an absolute pleasure to have him on the podcast. But this episode, we really just go off into all different, interests. We talk about bone loading, tendon loading, loading with bone pain in the return to running, spoke about biomechanics, anatomy, injections. We do our usual case study explanation, spoke about patellofemoral pain. It was really anything that tickled us. We followed it down. So it was a good episode, 90 minutes, which is awesome to speak for that long. So hope you all enjoy, and we'll see you soon. Yeah, we actually sent him an email because Pete was on the podcast maybe a year and a half ago, because that paper come out that even in the last 3 months, there was one randomized control trial that added Shockwave, comparing it to sham, and that showed no difference at 3 months and 6 months. And then there was another one for the Achilles, and then Pete's one come out showing there's no difference for sham. And that's at least comparing, just adding the only variable with Shockwave. So at least you can say it's kind of comparing apples with apples rather than, like you said, Shockwave and PRP.
So, yeah, but even with that recent Pete's paper, which I just pulled up, the problem with that one is that you can't conclude that Shockwave is ineffective on its own, because what it was used as an adjunct. So
with exercise.
Both groups did heavy loading, and one group added Shockwave, right? So all you conclude, and Pete's good at this when you hear him talk, he's like, all you can conclude is that adding Shockwave to exercise doesn't provide you any additional benefits than exercise. It doesn't say Shockwave is ineffective for treating Achilles tendinopathy, right? And it doesn't let you say exercise is superior than Shockwave. You would need a study that straight up looks at Shockwave versus a heavy loading program. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But most of the systematic reviews don't do that. They'll look at adjuncts and they'll say, well, just because it wasn't helpful as an adjunct, therefore it's not helpful at all. And that's unfair. So
yeah, that kind of study is good to do, because the assumption is that everyone, or you would assume that most people that see Achilles tendinopathy are going to do some form of load. It doesn't have to be heavy, but some form of loading. So I guess it's a bit more clinically relevant adding it on.
Well, for sure, because people think you should add it than just self-directed exercise. But then what about all the people because there's a lot of people who don't want to do exercise, and they're happy to go in and be taken care of. And they would be happy to have 3 to 6 sessions of Shockwave rather than doing 12 weeks of 3 to 6 times a week of 3 to 6 sets of whatever loading program. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think we should be giving people like straight up options and letting them decide.
And I think in those scenarios, it's often like with Achilles tendinopathy, you can kind of see it in more athletic populations, but then also quite sedentary populations. And I don't feel like they should be blended into the same study. I almost feel like that demographic of person needs to be separated, because what they might benefit from a rehab perspective is going to probably change depending on like their goals and what they deem as being valuable to them.
Yeah, for sure. I just have trouble. I mean, we're all advocates of exercise and activity. And I just feel like, am I pushing what my bias is on people if I knock a passive intervention, which hasn't been shown to be inferior? That's always my sheepishness there.
Yeah, I've got to give you a lot of credit, because it's really made me think a lot about my own practice when we talk about how critical we are of like corticosteroid versus PRP versus, in my world as a musculoskeletal podiatrist, foot orthoses, and then we're not as critical as exercise. And the really classic example for the plantar fasciitis, and a recent review come out, where it's always the advocate of everyone with plantar fasciitis needs a heavy loading program. And then we compare that to someone just getting education and just a soft heel, and basically they have the same outcomes. So we should be critical of exercise as well as all the other things that we are.
Oh yeah, I remember years ago when that Rathliff paper first came out, where it was heavy loading for plantar fasciopathy. I liked heavy loading. This was like 9 years ago, and I was always saying just load it. And you looked at that, and like it was compared to stretching. It was only at one time point that it was superior, and it was pretty negligible. And then in the long term, it made no difference. But people were like, "You got a heavy load." I'm like, "Come on, you can't say those things."
No, I mean they're products that are built off that protocol with the big toe that you put your big toe up and extend through there. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's just how it goes.
It's tough. It's like that. I'm drawing a blank, but I always talk about it. I think I should know it. It's that wonderful paper. Bill Vincenzino was like the co-author and the first. So I used to be strongly against orthotics, and then I started reading the research like with more a critical eye. And it was that paper where everyone had kneecap pain. Everyone did like exercises in the two groups, and one group added hip strengthening, and the other group added an orthotic, and there was no difference.
Yeah, it's like, what do you say? What do you say to that? Because I was the same, and even being a podiatrist, I was always to build self-efficacy and strength and rehab, and you only use orthotics when you need to, and then you look to the research. Even like for patellofemoral pain, when we just had Brad Neal, it's like orthotics do pretty well, just a simple off-the-shelf. Like it's not harmful for people, and if you compare that to exercise, people are being critical. We
were appraising an article at work the other day, which was like quite funny. It was the paper by Berg from 2024, that recent one on the randomized controlled trial, 10-year follow-up from the meniscectomy versus exercise therapy, the one I'm talking about. And we were just laughing about how that article kind of fits into anyone's bias. Like you could either read it and be like, oh, meniscectomy is not as bad as we once thought it was, or you can look at it and say, well, the exercise intervention group probably only did their exercises for the first 12 weeks of the 10-year follow-up, and then they decreased their compliance or participation in exercise, and that's why at the 10-year it looks like the results were actually the same. And so we kind of finished reading it and we were like, you could literally read this from whatever biased perspective you have and agree with the paper. And so then it's like, well, what is it actually then telling us at the end of the day when we are reading it? So it's tricky.
Yeah, I know. I had a debate on that one. I think I pissed people off because I was like, because this to me didn't tell you that exercise was effective, or at least the way we'll make conclusions on that. Because when I have people with meniscal tears, I don't really advocate straight up exercise unless they want to. I just think it's like this structure that we're not speeding up healing with exercise, right? So I'm kind of like, well, could you compare an exercise program with just graded activity and load management, or an exercise program with sham exercise, but we never really do that when it comes to exercise.
And I think that's probably a lot because the understanding of what exercise is actually doing to help painful problems is still not entirely clear. And particularly when we're talking about different tissues or maybe a non-specific tissue, I think it's hard to get that understanding around what we're actually trying to do with exercise sometimes. Like, is it to try and build more tensile strength in some areas, or is it more that habituation and exposure, or is it a little bit of both, or is it just general capacity building? And then what does capacity building actually even mean? So it's complex.
Capacity for what? Did Brad talk about that?
Yeah, that's why that's fresh in my mind, actually.
Yeah. I'm okay with the term as long as you acknowledge that it's incredibly vague. And then you say, that's why you should say, this is what I mean by capacity. I use the term comprehensive capacity. It's purposely vague because you can just fill in whatever you want it to mean. Yeah. And now the original, like I used to do functional capacity evaluations. That's what they were. You have to define what you mean by it.
Yeah, since he mentioned that, I've been very aware of how often I say the term, and then often like questioning myself in what I mean by that and what the patient thinks that I mean by that. So it's something that I'm more aware of now since it was brought to light.
Yeah, that's why I just say build shit back up, because it's
keep it simple.
Now we like to, before we get to some questions, we have some time dedicated. It's proven to be quite popular. We just run through some cases. Like Kelly and I both have a case, a weekly recap case. And for yourself, if you have a case previously this week or something that's been really interesting, I think you were just talking offline about a bit of a critical evaluation of Shockwave, so that might be good to use for your case. But what I wanted to talk about with mine, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts. And it's not a real, I guess, a sexy case per se. It's purely just how to help someone understand what's happening to them. But a common presentation for me in the clinic is a just below knee tendon injury. So this person just had a longitudinal split peroneal tear, and previously had something similar 5 years ago and had a corticosteroid injection into it, and it miraculously improved. So 5 years later, no discomfort, and then started to develop pain. Saw a sports doctor, had an MRI, diagnosed as a tear. Sports doctor did PRP, and then didn't improve, sent across to us, and he had a really associated laterally loading foot type. So we just did a really simple valgus wedge with some heel lifts, appropriate shoes, and then just spoke about what's happening with the tendon. And in that time, they had an orthopedic review as well. But purely just the biomechanics of it. Outside of that, and this is what I wanted to get your opinion on the ecosystem of the person. So high blood pressure, high cholesterol, some metabolic disease. The goals are just wanting to play golf and play with the grandkids, and ideally not use a cart to play golf twice a week. And when we see these cases in the clinic, we can kind of put our biomechanical hat on and talk about our orthotics and our rehab and all this kind of stuff. And my thinking was, rehab can be appropriate, but what am I trying to do with rehab? I really just, what do you want to do, and how can I dose you with that activities? Walk in 2 holes, use a cart for the rest, walk 4 holes in a couple of weeks and do that. But these kind of chronic degenerative tendons that we see, there's so much happening elsewhere in the body metabolically. And I just get this feeling that that's the thing that's going to move the needle the most, like getting the ecosystem healthy, which I know you talk a lot about, but that's incredibly difficult to do. So I wanted to get your thoughts and opinion on how do we do that?
You just said my thoughts and opinion. It's incredibly difficult to do. And honestly, we can suggest it to people, but unless they want to do it, and they have to be at some stage in their life where they want to get healthier, helping people connect the dots. And if they're already moving toward thinking they want to get healthier, and this might help, if they're 70 and this will help them live a better life for the next 20 years, then we can facilitate that. But we can only lay things out to people and make our case as much as we can. Because this person, they might already, I know they said that they wanted to walk some of the course, and so we would want to say, well, if we worked on all of these other things, that make you healthier, whatever it happens to be specific to them, this would help achieve your goal of walking. And if they realize that, then they might be more likely to do it. But at the same time, people, including me, we often say we want something. We don't really want it bad enough to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And we can't force people to do that.
Yeah. Do you think that...
So cut yourself some slack, man.
Yeah, my answer to that is, well, if they don't understand how beneficial it is for them, is that then on me as a practitioner that I should be able to show them that? It's a bit like someone with resistance training. There are so many benefits to train as you get older. And if someone doesn't want to do it, that's okay. I understand that. But is that because they don't understand why it's so good? And that's how I kind of think, but maybe not. Maybe I should just cut myself some slack.
So no, our first job is to help them understand, give them as much information as we can, right? And then they're informed. That's just proper informed consent, right? Then they're informed of the potential benefits of things that they could work on. And then it's their decision. And then we're there to help them, achieve those healthy lifestyle changes, or we refer to someone to help.
Yeah.
It is tricky in those cases too, because you're kind of giving them like calf raises or some form of isometric maybe as a load exercise. That's what I was going to say. It feels like the highest hanging fruit when you're addressing the kind of complexity of a...
But we talk about they need loading, the calf raises, they need the banded E version. Why are we even doing that? We just say that we should do exercise for them, but it's not the thing that I think is... it doesn't make any sense in my mind. If the tendon's overloaded, well, I don't want to take out what they already have left with rehab. I'm I'd rather you walk an extra couple of games with golf.
Just hit the activity guidelines first.
Yeah. And then the addressing metabolic disease, that takes a long time. I think of myself, if I was to shockwave that tendon, let's say, and it didn't, and it feels better compared to getting your metabolic health or your ecosystem better, that can take a couple of years. It's not going to move the needle very much. So it's challenging. It's really challenging.
And if we're honest, when I talk about improving the ecosystem, I recognize there's not a lot of research there. So there's the thing, someone might get incredibly healthier and it doesn't change their tendon related pain. Like that research is just, we have risk factors and we have correlational work where people who have metabolic disorders are more likely to have tendon related pain, but we don't have the work showing if you change those metabolic disorders, definitely that people will have less tendon related pain.
Do we have that research in like osteoarthritis? I think
we do. If you look at the GLP, like with the weight loss medications, that's coming out now, right?
Yeah.
So that's a nice proof of principle. And so if we view NEOA as similar to some tendinopathies or greater trochanteric pain syndrome, like my thing is, are these local manifestations of systemic problems? If they're all in the same bucket, which many people argue, and even some low back pain, then that would be a good proof of principle or something like that.
Yeah.
Or what we would have would be like kind of research that suggests it, where an exercise program that's very specific does the same as a very general exercise program. And that might argue for improving someone's overall health. But I don't, you know what I mean? But we would have to have measure those surrogate measures of health along the way and then see if they really mediated the improvements in pain and function. I don't know if people are doing that yet. It's just sort of like another way to make your case. It's not the strongest.
Can I ask you a really, really simple question? It shouldn't take too long. How do you think exercise helps with pain?
Yeah, fuck off. That's not a simple Jesus
in
Christ.
30 seconds.
So, I mean, I'm cool with going back to, did we do this in the course where I start with that, where I'm like, tell me why your patients got better? Yeah, it's one of my things.
Giving you a taste of your own medicine.
Yeah, I know. I just
been waiting
like
2 years for this.
Share my existential crises. It's sort of like, I do the other way. It's like, when you've helped someone with an exercise program, how are they different at the end of the program? What is it that led to less pain? And so it's tough. So if you even go back to like the nociceptive machinery or the nociceptive apparatus, I would sort of go at that. And so I think it's possible that exercise actually does change peripheral nociception in some way. I think it's certainly possible that it changes local inflammatory processes, okay? And then there's less nociception. I think it's possible that exercise could change the stress on tissues that are sensitive, and therefore there's less mechanical nociception. The best way to view that would be like, the simplest example would be sort of Falk-Mersman's research, where if you make the tendon stiffer and therefore stronger, it will undergo less strain during activities of daily living. And that in turn might somehow protect or offload the sensitive part of the tendon, and you don't have nociception occurring, being activated mechanically. So I think it's really possible that we do have less peripheral nociception. And then exercise can certainly change our processing of nociception at the spinal cord, right? Just via your classic descending pain modulation, conditioned pain modulation, all of that stuff. It's also possible that this is where the psychological factors come in with self-efficacy and fear and catastrophizing. I think that they work via biology. And one way that they might be working is that they would influence the sensitivity of peripheral nociceptors and at the level of the spinal cord and at the brain. So I think it's cool to stay in the nociceptive world to explain why exercise might be helpful. I think a great researcher on this would be Kathleen Sluka, if you want to read more. I don't know if she talks like that. I just know her old stuff. And Ruth Chimonetti, they would go into that stuff. They would probably go into the more mechanistic stuff. I just like to bring it to a framework that makes sense to me. And I can explain it easier to patients.
Like let's just kind of go a bit more to the psychological bit of fear and catastrophizing. I've seen some of the diagrams and kind of get a little bit more into the physiology and the biology, but is having those thoughts and feelings having some physiological change, and that influence, like a cellular change, and that will influence something that's happening at the spinal cord or something that's happening at the peripheral nerve that could make them more sensitive, and that we don't understand kind of what that is, whether it be more sensitive to inflammatory mediators or chemical changes or something like that. Because it's really hard to think, how I think about something, how does that change what's happening physically at the tendon? But there's obviously something happening on a cellular level, and that's what we don't understand yet as well.
Yeah, I would rather bring it back to physiology, and it helps patients get it too. I mean, I don't like to fly, and I have a relatively sensitive stomach, and then it's worse when I fly or when I'm stressed. Like I don't think I'm imagining what's going on in my stomach. I think I'm changing the physiology down there. And I think that fear and worry and catastrophizing can do that. So sure, there's psychological, but there's a physiological manifestation of that, would be my guess.
So my case for the week as well might have some relevance in this conversation too. So I recently saw a patient who was playing hockey 5 years ago and had a collision with another player.
Ice hockey? Do you have that in Australia?
No, we don't have ice hockey, just normal hockey.
We have one ring along the...
Oh,
ice hockey is normal hockey. So what type of hockey?
We have real hockey out on the field.
Okay, so some ice hockey without the ice. Got it.
Get over here. We have one ice rink on the East Coast.
Ice hockey here, though, actually.
Do it?
It does exist somewhere. There's one.
Okay, well,
it's always
whatever.
funny when you hear someone that does that. You're like, wow, how'd you get into that? No, other hockey, grass hockey. Grass?
No, field.
Turf.
Turf hockey.
Turf.
Just get a whole new name. Stickball. Got it.
Had a collision with a player and their knee blew up, was quite inflamed, and ended up seeing an ortho, had imaging, and at that time it was just diagnosed as a bone contusion. And from my understanding, they had quite a bit of like inhibition and weren't able to weight bear on their knee for some time just due to sensitivity, and started seeing a physio which tapered off fairly quickly. I only saw them this week, and they work in a trade where they're on their knees a lot, so crawling around up in roofs and things like that. And they continue to just experience like high levels of pain and sensitivity with kneeling. Over the last 5 years, they've built themselves fully back into the gym, so they have no pain or any issues with heavy squats, heavy lunges. They can run marathons and don't have any problem with anything apart from contact to the patella. Yeah. And so I guess what I'm asking myself is this a situation where I'm just going to gradually try to expose this person to kneeling over a very, very long time and hope to see some changes with that tissue desensitizing and then them being able to tolerate kneeling better? Or is it one where I do refer on to have it further investigated in the sense that there wasn't something looked at or something that might have been missed at the time, because when they initially had that MRI, there was a huge hematoma within the knee and they didn't really follow through with many follow-ups and ongoing physio at the time. And then from that, I sort of question, would they be able to run marathons and do heavy squats and lunges if that was the case? So with a concerned patient who's questioning whether they can continue their career because it requires so much kneeling, is it worth ruling out any of the nasty things that they're concerned about by referring on to a sports physician, for example? Or do I try to talk them into that slow process of habituation and exposure to kneeling?
Or Shockwave?
Yeah, so they haven't had an MRI yet? They
did at the time of the injury, which was in like 5 years ago. And there was a big hematoma and bone contusion at the time.
That's tough, because they're almost doing really well in some areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they're running and doing heavy squat.
Yeah, it's very specific. Yeah, which makes me think like surely there couldn't be anything.
Running a marathon, such high level.
Yeah.
If there was something nasty, they wouldn't be able to handle that, right?
That's what I would think. And then, you guys know this, but like you're always wondered, so if I get imaging, is there anything potentially that we could find that would change our management? That's what I would be racking my brain over here. This is where I'd have to go to like a textbook, because you're not supposed to know these things off by heart, right? Yeah. I can't. And so this is where I'd go, to PubMed, and like I can't think of anything that we'd have here. Twitter's good for this too, to talk to some surgeons, but they sound too good in other areas, So it's funny you bring it up. I wasn't sure if you're setting me up, because for the past 2 months, I had knee pain only with kneeling on one side. And honestly, it's so weird. I don't feel it where my knee hits the ground. I feel it up my IT band. And I'm like, what? I thought it was a skin thing. No, it's from just kneeling. It's the funniest thing. I don't know if any other time. I don't even feel it on my knee. I feel it on the side of my leg.
Anyways, only when you're in contact.
Only with contact. I thought it was like if I stretched it. No, it's not when the quads are under stretch. It's just pure contact. Because if I do like a hip flexor stretch in a weird way, I notice it. But back to your, so like, do they need imaging? I mean, here's the thing, like, if it's easier to get, I know people don't like to do reassurograms, but I
That's
think
kind of that's in my head what I'm like, that would be the point of it, I think.
so. The only concern there, like, you're going to be great at explaining any incidental findings. So there's not going to be a nocebo effect from weird findings there, because you'll be there to talk him through about what those things mean. So I've had plenty of patients that were really happy to get their imaging. So I know that's the problem with research, you guys. It's just an average, but there's outliers. So that it could be the right thing, especially 5 years of this, especially related to his career. So, and then in terms clinically, that is actually really tough. This is what I struggle with in my practice, is the expose or protect the debate. Right? Do you push into this, or like, it would be a frequency thing? Would we regularly have him kneel a little bit all the time to build him up to do it, or is he doing it a ton already at work?
And that's
any additional? Yeah. Like, has he backed off? It's like with my gymnastics and my wrists, I wear wrist guards. Braces, and they're fantastic, and I've tried to habituate for 8 years, and when I wear my wrist braces, I can literally do 30 times more stuff with them. This protection is beautiful, so I would wonder if there's some protection you can do at work. And then we'd want to know, how much is he really doing it at work? Does he avoid it for like weeks, and then he has a day where he does like 3 hours and he blows it up?
That's what I can gather. That's my understanding of what the situation is. So I think from that, like, I've kind of gone more towards like, try to get him exposing to it by like padding like lots and lots of pillows under his knees, and just like, instead of watching TV sitting, just try and kneel on it with lots of pillows, and gradually try to reduce the amount of pillows is the approach that I've taken so far. And then just, questioning, because I think I'm aware that this is going to take a very, very long time, given the amount of time that it's been going on, is like, will I then need to have the conversation of like, using some sort of imaging to reassure that there isn't anything else that could be contributing?
Not just, you do want to know, but I would look into that, protect it at work, and then high frequency, low dose, kneeling, because it sounds like he's like a runner who thinks, well, they used to be a runner. Now every 3 weeks they just go out and do 5K, and then they take 4 weeks off, and then they do 20K, and then they're just ruined. Like, you know what I mean? They're relatively fit. Like, we never prescribe that, but that might be what he's doing with his knee.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
It is hard in those cases where, for their job or their meaningful activity, is the load that's provocative. Like, say in that case, it's hard if you're up and climbing in roofs. I imagine there's only so much you can protect it. You should be able to do that. It's difficult.
I tried to discuss using like knee guards, and apparently it's not cool in the trade to do that. Like, you look a bit badly. If you're wearing knee guards, it's like, oh, I don't know about you.
Yeah. What about yourself, Greg? You were just kind of discussing offline, Shockwave. Any interesting cases or research things, or just thoughts that you had over the week? Or ever?
No, I was just looking. I'm always interested in like how we know what we know, and like, am I being logically consistent in my criticism? So I just saw some posts. This is by Meekins it was against Shockwave, and one of it was about patellar tendinopathy. Shockwave, it was a systematic review or meta-analysis arguing that Shockwave wasn't effective. And I was like, okay, that's a neat headline. I don't really care. I don't sell Shockwave, but I wanted to look at it. And then I went to the meta-analysis, and there was originally 7 papers, but 4 of them weren't included in the meta-analysis. And then they said that there was 3 papers included in the meta-analysis. And then when I looked, this is what I mean about, I don't know how we make these strong conclusions here. When I looked at the papers in it, of the 3, 2 of them were the same. They just included the data from 6 months and 12 months. Okay. And then those 2 that one paper, although counted as 2, they concluded that Shockwave was not effective, and that helped. That was accounted for 66% of the weight of the meta-analysis, and the other paper only got 33%, and that concluded that Shockwave was effective. So, like,
we haven't got much there.
We have such a strong conclusion on such weak research. Was what I've been reading about now. And I'm like, how often do we do this?
What is your advice to clinicians to be able to critically appraise research like that when we also have like full caseloads and seeing, 50 patients a week or whatever it might be, working 38-hour weeks? Like how do you recommend clinicians do that?
I think so. Every now and then, like you can't second guess everything. I just randomly pick this, and I was like, oh God, this is garbage. This meta analysis, and then see, I don't know, that you have to find people that you can trust, I guess. Like we all want to be knowledge translators. You guys are, and you do a good job, and there's a point where you have to trust. It's like the public and vaccines, right? I can't go on Facebook and do my research. Like at some point in time, you have to trust the experts. So that kind of sucks. So I would say find people you trust, but then every now and then challenge it. If there's a meta-analysis, go read a few of the papers in there. Right. And it's surprising sometimes where you're like, shoot, they shouldn't have said this.
That's good. I feel like that's good realistic
never should have been
advice.
published. Sorry, what's that?
I just think that's good realistic advice. I feel like sometimes it gets overwhelming, feeling like you're never doing enough to remain up to date. And it feels like you should be reading every paper and understanding all of it. But it's nice to hear that you pick your battles a little bit sometimes.
It does. Like, yeah, I don't know why our profession's very much about don't do this sucks. And I was definitely like that. And now I'm like, can I really say this thing sucks? And I'm not so certain about that, anymore. I'm happy to teach and promote what I believe is helpful for people, but I don't feel like I need to say to build that stuff up by saying these other things are shit.
I think a good example of that is, and you definitely mentioned this in your course a couple of years ago, is the same outcomes for patients who with a similar condition who might follow like Stu McGill's low back philosophy or Peter O'Sullivan's. It's very different in how the treatment is performed or explained, but patients still get a good outcome. And so we know that it's less about, the specific thing and probably about the fact that they're doing something and they've bought into an intervention. But then what about like the long-term outcome is something that I'm interested in. Like if we followed that patient over 10 years, what's their self-efficacy like? What's their fear avoidance like in certain approaches?
Yeah, no, it's super difficult. I mean, the thing with me comparing McGill with O'Sullivan or CFT was really to say, like, are we quibbling over the things that don't matter so much? I mean, I really align with CFT. I'm a movement optimist. I believe in flexing your spine. And so I was like, but how do people get better with McGill, right? And I was like, what are the common threads between the two? And first, like, if I can just do this quickly, it's like both of them really listen and understand the person. They help the person make sense of pain, to use Pete's or Samantha Bunsley's work. But the way they differ is just what their explanation is. But then both explanations lead into something that's useful and that the patient can do something about. So they both build self-efficacy, right? McGill's just might be a little bit more pessimistic about the disc and things like that and spine flexion or whatever it happens to be. But they're both saying, here's the problem. And then look, over here, I have the solution for you. Right. And then what they do is both of them get buy-in with a wonderful exam, and they get buy-in with doing symptom modification. Right. So they find the thing that hurts and then they change it in some way. They just have a different explanation of why it hurts and why that change in pain is helpful. And then they reinforce those changes in pain with physical activity or exercise. And then they both say, well, what do you want to do? What's important to you in life? Well, I'm going to help you do that. So like that was sort of the point of that exercise. Like, wow, like how can these people look so different, on the surface and yet like, what's the secret sauce here? What's the common thread or the magic ingredient? But to your point, why I would much rather be like more a movement optimist and less McGill for some things is the potential that there might be a subset of people where they hear it's their disc, and if I keep flexing my back, it's going to cause further disc herniation and they're going to be in trouble. I think that there's probably a small subset of people who respond really negatively to that, right? And if no one has research on this, because McGill's approach hasn't really been tested in an RCT, but surely Sarman's certainly has, which is very comparable. and they both do well. But in the long term, there's probably a subset of people who are going to not do well with that approach because it could resonate and create some fear.
To be critical of ourselves, and especially myself, that is the argument for those treatment philosophies, is if you speak to someone like that, they internalize it and then they don't go and do the things, or they worry about those things. But we kind of don't have any data to suggest that actually is happening. We don't have any long-term data.
No, we don't. It's like, yeah, I mean, so we should be more specific here. Like, I think what people are worried about is saying, hey, you should avoid spine flexion because in the long term, it's going to cause this degeneration to your disc or whatever it happens to be. And I doubt that McGill would say it that way. Maybe other people would, but I think he'd be much more nuanced in his take there. So I don't want to misrepresent it, but I think so we shouldn't even say McGill. We should just say like a really biomedical model that makes people a little bit worried and not trust their body, like the kinesiopathological model. So I would agree that could certainly happen, but it's true we don't. And that's why you'll see, I'm not up to date on this literature, but when they compare like a biopsychosocial pain education intervention with the biomedical, you're not seeing any difference in outcomes.
Yeah, I just...
Yeah, 10 years, who knows?
Yeah, is that something that is going to be followed over a longer time period?
I mean, I don't know. It's so hard to do these things. This is like, get the case. It makes sense though. Like I still agree with not saying these things because when you're in practice long enough, well, you see these things. You see people who are really ruined by their thoughts of fragility, you know? So this is one of the ones where for me, I'm okay saying, I don't think that we should do that, right? I've chosen what a line in the sand and where I'm going to stand. I don't think it's appropriate. But then I'm also honest with the research and saying, well, I don't have strong research to support that, but this is what I think we should be doing.
Yeah. And that makes sense for the argument of exercise versus anything else, which I am similar to yourself. I would think I've drawn a line in the sand if when we're saying studies come out to say that exercise alone versus Shockwave alone for Achilles tendinopathy, and let's say they're both better at 12 weeks. Well, it's a pretty logical assumption to assume that the exercise program, if the pain's the same, they're going to have a higher capacity to their meaningful activity, whether it be walking or running or climbing the stairs. It's going to be better. Although we can't actually say, because you can never really test those things, like how do we test their function in life outside of that? It's usually just pain and how they're reporting their feeling.
Well, yeah. I mean, exercise has the best side effects. That's always the best trump card for arguing for exercise over something else. Although I wish we had more work on this. I'm more of a meaningful activity prescription person, especially with running, where I think running is the best way to build up the capacity of the calf, you know, running as rehab. And I think I had Pete Malieres on my podcast. It's just everything's interconnected. Everyone has a podcast nowadays, referencing podcasts within podcasts. And I think he talked about, I'm going to totally misrepresent him, sorry, but we always test exercise. We never test load management or a return to run program, really.
I think, we spoke to the exact same thing. Can we just load manage patellofemoral pain instead of doing knee and hip exercises for runners?
Hott did it. That was actually one paper. There's the Hott paper, HOTT, and they compared it to like free range activity versus exercise. And there was no difference. So just load management. And Esculier did it as well with 3 groups. All did load management, smart return to running. One group did gait retraining. The other group did hip and knee exercises. And again, no difference between the groups. And I swear Pete said he did a preliminary study and was finding the same thing. Or maybe he had trouble getting it published because like the powers that be didn't want it.
Yeah.
Or like ethics wouldn't let it go through. One of those things.
I mean, it makes so much sense. Like if someone can, I don't know if it was because I know you have your running course, but I think I'm thinking of the Reconciling Biomechanics. I've done that one online, maybe not the running one. Anyway, it makes so much sense if someone can't run 30 minutes until 30 minutes they get pain, but they can run 10 minutes. You just pick in between and then dose them with our best guess of what we think they can tolerate, rather than say getting in the gym and do this Achilles rehab and this calf rehab. Yeah. Do you say that they should have some prerequisites for running, or it's like, hey, you can run a minute? Cool. Let's just go out and run.
It's human. That's the prerequisite. You don't have to earn your right to run. That's my whole thing. It doesn't mean you go and hammer sprints, you know, and certainly there's some research with the higher BMI of really easing into it with the walk program. but everyone should be doing that. And I would go even farther of like, if you want to stay in the capacity world of building capacity, what I'm really interested in is you can run 10 minutes and you feel okay, or 15, but you flare up at 30. If we think we need to build attributes to run, I think you can use running to do that. You know, if you need to get the calf stronger, well, run uphill. So if you want more stress on the Achilles, then change your foot strike for 30 seconds and run forefoot for a bit. If you want more mobility, go up hills, but make sure your heel drops, you know, as you go up that hill. Run backwards. If you want to train the outside of the foot, run sideways. Want to train the inside, run sideways as well. Start to cut, play around, run on trails. Like, I think we can really dose or pick up your speed to stress something. I think we can do some cool stuff with just playing around with that. Even if we stay in the movement preparation capacity building model, just be creative with your training.
Yeah, it's an argument I tell people. Same thing, you have to draw the line in the sand. I do believe that the majority of runners in specific cases should be doing some form of resistance training. The subgroup of people, like if they have a previous bone stress, because running and building bones are a little bit different, running compared to heavy resistance. There is I can't think of the study name where you do get an increase in tendon stiffness that's higher at a higher load compared to medium loads or running.
Yeah.
And tendon stiffness, we could argue, it is somewhat of an important property for running. So would you say in those cases, there is some benefit to doing some resistance stuff because you can't get everything from running?
So it's true. Deva, I read this, Deva, I can't pronounce his name, but he's done some work showing that running can change tendon stiffness, but it's pretty tiny, right? And the argument for why, even though the loads can be quite high and the strain will be greater than 5%, which is normally sufficient to make the tendon adapt, it's that it's only applied over 250 milliseconds. And we know that it has to be applied for like over 3 seconds or so. So that's why the tendon doesn't get stiffer. So that is a good case for slow, heavy strength training if you think that tendon stiffness has to change. And I advocate it for that. And because I can't be sure, I advocate it. But if we're to argue against myself, I would say, like, just logically, right? If we just look at, specific adaptation to imposed demands, if someone wants to run, what is the best way to build them up, right? Should be running. If someone wants to jump, it should be jumping. Like, plyometrics won't change tendon material properties either. But of course, there's something changing about that tendon, right? Because they're not getting injured and they've built themselves up to tolerate jumping. So maybe something's happening in that tendon that we're not able to measure. That's my caveat here. Does that, because you're arguing that we should do heavy resistance training because it makes the tendon stiffer and stronger.
Well,
is that right?
I'm saying that it's from what I have read, it's both make them stiffer, but heavy resistance training seems to make it more stiffer. And it was something like 60 or like medium loads to high loads. For pain, doesn't seem to be a difference, but for tendon stiffness, it's like 64% versus 25%. But that percentage difference, I have to then be able to say, well, that percentage difference is better than the other attributes that you would get, like you just spoke about, that we don't actually know, that people are obviously getting when they run.
Yeah, that's the problem. And so I would say, I don't know, what's the best thing to prepare someone? That's what we have to ask to prepare someone to run. It's Mersman. He's done a lot of the research there, but most of it's in kids, right? So he would just say, like, the goal task isn't enough, or it's too much, actually. That's why he thinks it's problematic. Like, it's so heavy that it's causing the injury. So you have to do that other stuff to develop the stiffness to not strain the tendon so much when they do the goal task.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like Keith Barr's work and the stress shielding and I think
treating the degenerative portion?
So here, okay, I'm going to be an asshole.
He's been on the pod as well. He was a popular episode.
Okay,
but like actually,
all that stuff is from 10 years ago in the engineered ligaments. And we haven't seen any of that since and replicated in humans. Like, it's a neat idea, but like, and I know research is hard, but we need to stop just saying these things like facts. That's the problem with all of that. And a lot of those things, like, he has some assumptions about like stretching and loading, about how tendons respond that aren't really well supported. That's one of the concerns there, that like stretching will decrease the stiffness in the long term of certain tissues, which it won't.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I think like that's a super neat idea, super worthy of reading, just like some caution in like holding a strong opinion there.
Yeah,
that's what I would argue.
like I think Ebony Rio said in argument of his as well, like you're not dealing with, you know, the normal hormones and the stresses and the health of the metabolism of the rest of the human when you're just looking in a lab. And so maybe when everything's controlled, there may be something that could happen from that stress shielding of the tendon. But then how do we know that's going to happen when you add in all of those other variables to an actual alive human?
Yeah, and even you can look at it. We do have research where they do prolonged isometrics. And really, if you're doing a heavy slow resistance program, it's quasi-isometric. Like those heavy slow resistance programs are 3 seconds eccentric, 3 seconds hold, 3 seconds concentric. That is slow. That it might as well be isometric, right? And we don't see in those studies the tendinosis changing, because the argument is you hold it for a long period of time, right? And then that stress shielding stops, and the injured tissue or whatever, the tendinosis gets the load, and it causes it to adapt. Is that fair?
Yeah. You get compressive load into the degenerative part.
Yeah. So we would see. I would think that we would see it with the slow, heavy resistance training, or the HSR heavy slow resistance training, right? Or we would see it with all of the isometric work that's gone on through the years. Or and then even if they don't measure like tendon material property changes there, we would see it clinically, those things being better. We don't. So I'm like, I respect like the work and the ideas. I'd be just like, I'm just cautious with strong opinions.
Yeah.
And I think I'm still to take that from your course that we did. I think about it more with foot orthoses as well. But, you know, these things can be happening and people can still improve despite what you think is happening. So you could do, you know, the protocol, whatever it is, 3 or 4 times a week, 10 minutes of heavy isos, and think you're changing the degenerative part, or someone can sell a program that does that and people can still improve. It's just not how we think.
Yeah, for sure, which is great. But then if you fully accept that program, then you lose your flexibility. You don't realize that there's lots of options. I like his stuff where he argued do a little bit, you know, for 3 to 5 minutes every 4 to 6 hours. And that's how tendons like to adapt. That's neat. But I would, again, like to see that in humans, if it's better than 3 times a week and all that stuff.
Yeah, which is similar for bones in, they trying to resensitize, or your bone resensitizing every 6 to 8 hours. So maybe we should be doing plyos every 6 to 8 hours to have the best impact on bones. But then in something that Blake and I have gotten into so many arguments about recently is when to introduce and how to introduce plyos after a stress fracture.
Let's debate, Greg, here and now.
Yeah.
So then we have to argue about this again. When
and how and frequency and intensity after someone has dealt with a low risk stress fracture.
You're basically taking we don't know how to. The assumption is I'm taking a guess. You've just gone through the re-rolling process. You don't have any pain. I'm taking a guess at how much I think your bone can tolerate. And because pain isn't a good, it's good to know with bones. I don't know how much to give you. Do I give you 2 sets of 20, 3 sets of 10?
Or do we just not do the plyos and just make running the plyo and use that as a way to build bone density in that initial phase?
You're never going to know, so don't beat yourself up. But I would recommend looking at the minimum effective dose research, which says how I love this research now, and I've injured so many people doing plyometrics in my career, not bone stuff, but we should be way more cautious. Actually, even for great performance, we can be a lot more cautious in our prescription than people might think. Meaning like you can get away with just 2 sets of 6 and then that's it. Just start there really low. Because no matter what, like people are going to get benefits from it. It's like starting a strength program. No matter what they do, they're going to get stronger. And so I would take a performance aspect to this, 2 sets of 6 twice a day, done, easy. And like how hard? 30% of your max. And then next week, 35%. Because it took them years to get to this stage. They've been having trouble. What's the rush here? And that stuff builds so quickly. And then you look at where they are in 6 months, and even that I would go slow. Because if you look at a plyo program, you should be thinking 40 to 70 jumps a week. That's all you need. It's nothing.
So it's like a couple of minutes worth of jumping.
2 times a day, though, is more frequency, I think, than we ended up landing on. That's, I guess, but the intensity there probably being lower than maybe what we had discussed.
Yeah.
So I say that kind of based on like the Robling the old Turkey studies that started all the bones stuff. That's the 6 to 8 hour idea. So just a little bit, might as well just do a little bit. I think it seems safer, right? And then the 40 to 70 jumps a week is sort of based on just performance and plyometrics. It would be different than for targeting bone. It's just targeting performance and that stuff. And then do you know Christine Bailey's study?
Which one's that?
Is it... She's the 2010. It's like with perimenopausal women, I think they had low, not stress fractures, but low bone marrow density.
Jumps every day.
Yeah, 5 times 10, which I bet is too much. I bet you didn't even need that much. You need to see 3 times 2. But she did really argue for high frequency. So I'm like, well, why not just do 2 sets in the morning and 2 at night?
Yeah. And how early after a bone stress injury are you typically introducing that? Is it something that you're waiting until they've built themselves back a reasonable amount of running volume and their meaningful activity? Or is it something that you would use earlier?
Yeah, earlier. So this is the idea. So maybe start them with that walk-run program in the morning. And then instead of jumping in the morning, that would be their bone stress. And then in the evening, do the jumping. And when I say jumping, I mean like hopping, almost like people be like, it's skipping. I could do this for 20 minutes. I'll be like, no, just do 10.
Yeah.
Let's start slow. There's no rush. Let's just start slow.
Is the argument for that in the morning? So say they're doing the walk run in the morning, and we know that generally isn't. If we think about what's the most optimal thing for bone, we can say that doing a heavy plyometrics or heavy plantar flexor load is going to be better than just walk running. Is it a matter of they just haven't done bone loading for so long? It doesn't really matter what they do. They're probably going to get the same benefit. It's more like 6 months later when they're trying to optimize everything. If we're trying to optimize for bone health, it's like just do something where you land or come off the ground.
Yeah, I think running still is osteogenic. We just haven't dosed it appropriately.
Yeah.
Right. There is some work where runners' bones are a bit denser than non-runners.
It is.
You could run 3 times a day and turn it into a bone building program. I bet you could vary how you run, where you do heel strikes and midfoot and forefoot, and change up your speed and run up hills and where you're running and turn it into a bone building program. So that's what I like to do with people. I even recommend, and I'll ask patients if they want to do it as prevention. I just say it's just an idea, like it's just a player. I like form fartleks. That's my joke. It's not a good joke.
Form fartleks?
Yeah, we always talk about fartleks speed, but I'm like, just play around with your gait style. Same idea.
Sideways running, backwards
running. Sideways running, backwards running. Silly running.
calls it silly running.
I didn't publish. Like my friend, this is how everything works with connections. I had a friend who was I used to write for Canadian Triathlon magazine. Yeah. I didn't earn it. I just had a good friend who was the editor. That's like, so it's just who you know. And I remember writing in like 2011 or 12, just having people do 3 warm-ups in their run. Like break up your run with a warm-up, because a classic warm-up is like hopping, skipping, A's, B's, shuffling, pickups and sprints. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, I think we can argue that this is rehab or this is building capacity.
Yeah. Like I'll get some runners in the afternoon if they run in the morning or vice versa, just to do 10 minutes of drills, which is basically high tendon load because they're going to be hitting the ground hard and relatively high bone load. And it's a lot more enjoyable. Whether they're working on form, they're still getting pretty good stimulus from doing that.
Yeah.
While we're on the topic of bones as well, so we know that there's a lot of asymptomatic bone stress injuries that can be detected on MRI. What do you think really differentiates a symptomatic bone stress injury from an asymptomatic bone stress injury?
Comment on Rich's post as well, which I did as well, because to add to Kelly's point, in my head, I'm assuming if there's edema, we can be pretty positive that there's some bone remodeling happening. And we know during that bone remodeling period, the bone is a little bit less receptive to tensile work based off Stuart Warden's work. The assumption is that bone is a little bit weaker if there's edema there. So then if we continue to load and not worry about it, does that then increase their risk? Because it comes up all the time when they have an inconsequential finding of some bone edema.
Yeah, I thought with that work, it's not like the tendon research where if someone has a tendinopathy, if someone has tendinosis and no pain, they are more likely to develop tendinopathy in the season. Even that though, that's like, I think I just looked at this. Say with an Achilles tendon, you might have 30% of people who have an asymptomatic tendinosis, but only like 2 or 3% will develop tendinopathy. So it's not like guaranteed. But I didn't think you could say that with bony edema.
No, I think that they can follow. There's that one on the tibia where they followed them over a 2-year period
Yep.
where 43% of collegiate runners had up to grade 3 on the Fredrickson scale bone stress and didn't develop a stress fracture without changing their training load.
So can I throw a kink into this? Because I don't know. I don't know what
We love
turns.
kinks.
This is your question applies to every structural change. What turns tendinosis into tendinopathy? Because tendinopathy just means the tendon hurts, right? What turns knee OA, which is structural knee OA, into clinical knee OA, which is you have structural changes plus pain. Like, this is where we're all struggling. And what's interesting, I don't know, I don't, like, we say bone marrow edema, right? They don't use that term anymore when it comes to knees and hips. It's bone marrow lesions, right? And when you look at and I think they're the same. I'm not an expert on, like, the histology here, but I'm pretty sure they're the same. And bone marrow lesions in the knee and the hip are super symptomatic. I don't know what's different about the foot and the tibia in runners, but bone marrow lesions, it's one of those structural changes that are massively correlated with knee pain and knee OA. Do you guys know that stuff, or like?
Yeah, Brad, well, that was actually one of our other...
Was that something that's made me crazy over the last
Brad
week?
said that on the podcast. It's like, in your question...
So he was saying, like, one of the findings on imaging for patellofemoral pain might be bone marrow edema. And my question is, what's the difference between bone marrow edema in a patellofemoral pain that's not a stress reaction compared to bone marrow edema in the tibia that is a stress reaction? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know that stuff. I just know the OA literature. I'm trying to rewrite, like, something about structure and relationship to pain. And so sure, structure is not that great, except with bone marrow lesions.
There was
and it's one thing just that people need to know. They need to know this. So not only does it correlate, when you see the bone marrow lesion go away, that correlates with the reduction in symptoms as well. Like, so it's not even just like a cross-sectional thing. When they follow them, it's something. So sorry, Blake. Okay, yeah.
No, that was, like Brad said that as well. The
I got nothing.
About, like, what's the driver of nociception in the knee? And he was saying that edema is correlated to be quite high. And I was just saying with the foot, with the tendon research, I did read a paper this week, only briefly, that was talking about, and I'm going to butcher it, but that tendinopathic part of the tendon, that degenerative portion, something to do with memory and its ability to tolerate load, its threshold to flare up is a lot higher. So that structure definitely does mean something. And whether someone recovers and they don't have any pain, they're going to be a little bit more likely, I assume, to flare up compared to someone that doesn't have that tendinosis with that structural change.
That's pretty consistent. That's like the Cashman study where they follow the athletes. Is that what you mean, or related to
I think
that?
so. I can't remember the author. But yeah, what do you to go back to the bone edema? What do you think? Like, let's say you get someone with some imaging and they have bone marrow edema through their third metatarsal and it's pretty diffuse and they don't have any pain. Is that an indication to say, well, that bone is definitely going to be weaker? Is it normal? Do we look everywhere else? How focal is it? Is it widespread to have it elsewhere in the body, to have muscle soreness? Let's keep it going. It's a hard one.
I think I view this like there's the Ann Smith paper in the low back where people who have more changes on their MRI, more disc bulging, are more likely to develop, it's not just cross-sectional, to develop low back pain. And it just says it nudges up their chance. And to me, it just sort of, we should be doubling down on the health of the person. So when you see that person with those bony reactions, I don't think it just means you want to make sure that their ecosystem is as healthy as possible. But I wouldn't say that we have to be any more especially cautious. We just want to be more cognizant of it and really give people that information. There's not much you can do.
Yeah.
Do you think that research in any way is going to lead to us understanding in a symptomatic bone stress injury that perhaps we don't have to be as aggressive with the offloading?
Yeah, that's what I would hope. Yeah. So I used to work with the running clinic, Blaise Dubois and JF Escoulier, and they regularly talked about, and I'm sure I did this in my careers, of pushing people into a little bit of discomfort with certain stress reactions. And I think
like
I said that
sites.
On Rich Willie's thing. I said that this is the problem with these findings like this, is like, we just, in other areas of the body, we say pain is not a good guide, right? It doesn't tell us what the structure. So that's a perfect example. You have these structural changes.
It's the only thing that apply, like the only area that we are so diligent with pain.
Yeah.
Everything else, it doesn't really matter as much. Well, less.
Yeah.
So.
Well, because the risks are
so
higher.
Why do we care about this? So why do we think that pain is telling us when the structure is compromised? It may not be at all. Because here when we have asymptomatic structural changes, there's no pain, right? So if someone has pain, could they have the same structural strength as someone else? And what you're saying is we're pulling them back when we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You know, I'm working with a patient right now, and he's in the States. He doesn't have the money for an MRI. He's a 2:12 marathoner, right? He has some hip pain going on. He's worried about a stress fracture, and me too. And he thinks he had one before, but he just guessed that he did, right? And so the MRI is probably what he needs to know for sure, but we're never getting one. So how do we work around this? And we can't completely just shut it down if he's like to be 100% pain-free, because how many other things in the hip could be sore?
And as a runner as well, it's pretty safe to not have soreness is odd somewhere. Yeah.
So this is always our challenge here.
But then in the hip, like the risk of it progressing is quite high and can be catastrophic. So I would personally, and I've got the luxury of imaging as it being a little bit more accessible here. That's not one that I would feel comfortable loading through.
Me neither. And so he knows that. We can only and I'm not telling him to load through it. I'm advising to back off. But as long as our patients know that and they can make their decisions, that's what we have to do here. So we're not running with any discomfort, but he gets it with fader. It seems like a labral joint pain, which could also be painful with a stress fracture. And he's sorry, go ahead.
It's the risk that's just the big thing in my mind is just the risk of if we correlate someone has some bone edema and we're saying that pain isn't a good guide, like for the tendon, we say with tendon all the time, your Achilles is a bit soft, that just means you're loading it, that's normal, but with a bone it's not. I guess in our heads it's well, if you're the worst case scenario with the tendon is you're probably just going to flare it up and make it sore. The worst case with a bone is if you do too much, you're going to refracture it. But then again, you're not really going to refracture it. If it's sore and you load it, it's pretty hard to push it to a stress fracture in the majority of cases, but also you don't want to play that game either. No. I guess that is the difference with them compared to a tendon, the kind of end stage.
It's so tough. There's a famous Canadian runner, Krista Duchesne, and she was, I think, maybe 39 at the time. She wanted to make it to the Olympics, 2016, or I think so. 150 meters from the half marathon, her hip snapped. It went. She had a femoral neck stress fracture. But wait, she still made it to the Olympics. And she didn't even have a lot of symptoms before this. But she'd always had hip pain. I remember talking to her physio at the time. This is no different than normal than what she'd had for years. Yeah. And so, but then she got it repaired and she got back on it. So I think my story here is that sucks, but she still made the Olympics. Sometimes you don't know. This is the problem with pain and its poor relationship to structure. But also, I wonder if she would have done anything different if she knew that she had. So our responsibility is to educate people as much as we can, but it's often up to them. This is the challenge here. As long as people know that it can go, and then what the consequences and potentially, it's avascular necrosis. Have you ever seen any of that? I've never seen it. I just know that it's a consequence.
Seen it in the foot. Yeah. I mean, just when you said that, even that conversation is difficult. And the common scenario for me is someone that has a race and they have something happening or they're just recovering. They're like, listen, I want to do absolutely everything I can. And I basically have to say, well, let's say I'll use an example that I had recently of the navicular. The worst possible case is you could fracture the navicular and they're not great at healing. You could end up with a pin through your bone and you could potentially have some post-traumatic osteoarthritis. You could have midfoot pain for the rest of your life. These are some real scenarios.
Yeah.
And there's this thing in the back of my mind where I want to help, but I have to explain the risk. But if you're going to accept the risk, I'd at least rather be the person to guide you than you see someone else and then not have that nuance. So it's kind of this double-edged sword. It's quite, and I'm sure you've had that scenario as well, where it's I do need to help you, but I kind of wish that you would just not do that. But if you're gonna, you're gonna, and that's informed consent.
No, and that's excellent. I think that's what we can do. And often I will sort of say what I would do. So maybe I'm not as just informed consent and vanilla. I kind of suggest I
would run. If I got a race coming up, I would run too. I thought that's what I kind of get that from them.
Yeah. And that's why it is nice with the work on high risk versus low risk stress fractures. You have a race coming up and it's a lower stress fracture and you're okay with 7, 8 out of 10 pain and you're, a kilometer from the finish line, you worked your ass off for 8 months. I could limp it home.
I got a femoral shaft bone stress injury last year or the year before, I think. And the symptoms came on. I caught it pretty early, but came on when I was running a 5K and I just snuck under 20 minutes, for the first time.
Nice.
And I have no regrets whatsoever. I'm like, I don't even care that I got a bone stress injury from that. I got under 20 minutes. I'll do it again if I could.
Nope.
So yeah, I totally get that. Like eventually, potentially being able to load through a bit of pain with bone stress injuries. Is that like, how is that ever going to get approved through ethics to study that, or will it, or can it, do you think?
I think it's been done. I think we're doing podcast within a podcast again. Steph Muntz talked about that on mine. If you guys can email me, I'll track it down. I think she has a paper where it was in like the military where they pushed it into pain and they did okay.
On low risk sites, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And so your bone just adapts eventually and you're all good.
Or
Adaptation
not.
machines.
Or not. Or it gets worse.
But in general, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it is weird that with bones and now medial tibial stress syndrome, which I don't agree with, where we're like, oh, no. If it hurts, shut it down. Our relationship to pain is inconsistent, you know, and we don't do it with kneecap pain. We don't do it with tendon pain, although we do it if you think that tendon pain is compression related. We have a big inconsistency here. Medial tibial stress syndrome, I swear there's just people who have it. It's who they are. They're going to have that sensitivity on the inside of their shin bone for their whole life. Yeah. It's gold for like a manual therapist, because you poke there and you're like, oh, you're so tight. I got to release that for the next 16 years.
Don't you just have those intrusive thoughts sometimes with patients where you just wish you could say things?
This would be someone to like,
yeah, your glutes are tight. That's what the problem is. Let's just stretch them. You'll be fine. I wish I was more morally incorrect.
Do you think it's more like an entheopathy?
Encephalopathy.
Yeah, for MTSS on the periosteum. It seems an involuntary tissue that's low risk and you just treat it like a tendon, really. But sometimes people just seem to get really quite sensitive. Sometimes they do need a week off, but it seems logical just treat it like a tendon. And you do all the rehab is similar to a tendon. But even for those cases, and this is something that I've changed my mind on a lot, I'm like, if you think it's the periosteum and they're getting flared up from running, they don't need to do all this weird tib-ant calf raises. They just need to get dosed with running, because you're not going to make the periosteum more tolerable. Or the best way to make it more tolerable to running is by doing more running, not a heavy plantar flexor force.
Yeah. Or, change the stress on it in some way when they're running. I'm with you. That's why it goes back to the meniscus stuff. I don't understand the strength training for the meniscus. You just got to let it heal.
Yeah.
You just got to settle down. So do other shit like your glutes.
I was just thinking when you said that you wrote for the Canadian triathlon, I was like, you should start doing some writing for Runners World, and you should clash with that author that said how to treat glute amnesia. I saw you share that Running World article, and I was like, you shared a couple, and I'm like, geez, who is writing this? This is crazy. It's a massive magazine.
I feel bad for these writers. They want to get their break. They've got to write something. They haven't been reading this stuff, like literally the glute stuff. My first paper was in 2004 on it. We looked at gluteal inhibition during the prone leg race. So I've been thinking of it for 2 decades. So I just feel like I don't want to punch down, but sometimes I cave.
I know what you mean.
No.
Yeah.
I got to sell magazines. How much can you write?
Yeah, it's a catchy headline.
Although they have no, he's not with them anymore. They used to have Alex Hutchinson. He was just a perfect treasure but he's not with them anymore. He's with Outside Online only now.
Yeah. Do you when we started as clinicians, we started with social media and started out of degree with social media. Do you would have started where it wasn't Instagram, Twitter, that kind of thing. It really was, or X or whatever it is. Do you think overall it's a net positive? Because when you said that, sometimes you slip, because I do as well. I see some idiot making a reel and I just get so frustrated, and I know the algorithm is doing that on purpose, and I want to share and comment, but it's a waste of time. But then I'm like, social media sucks. But then I think, wow, there's so much good information. We can connect with people like yourself, and there's so many good people out there. Do you think it's an overall net positive? Because you've lived through both kind of worlds. Always wanted to ask you that question.
Yeah. You know what? I almost said no, because there's so much more garbage out there. But I think people were already consuming garbage some other way and already thinking garbage. That's just the garbage is already out there. So I think it's a net positive, because I think there's people who they question the garbage, but they don't know how yet. They feel like they're alone. And then they find a lifeline of people putting good information out there. And then they feel like they're not so alone anymore, and they don't have to like question themselves. The garbage was already going to exist. That's pop culture.
Yeah,
So
that's social media.
I think it's a net positive. I'm going to keep saying
I feel like I'm in like my bubble of seeing lots of good information because I choose to follow people that I trust the information that they're putting out onto social media. And then sometimes I need to remind myself that there's a whole different world out there. And I often am not seeing some of those things until they're brought to light by like yourself or Adam Meekins maybe. Yeah, something that our parents might say, perhaps that they saw on the news. I sometimes forget that there's that poor information floating around out there.
It's when you go to the Surge.
What universe?
Yeah, sometimes the Lockman comes up on my reels and I go, no algorithm. I click and go, I do not want to see this. Please don't show me this stuff. It's horrible.
He's a big fan of me for some reason.
I don't know if you've spoken about that with anyone online. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts and I haven't heard it, but I think we both listened to it when we were in Tasmania. We listened to that conversation that you had, and I'm sure you've had a lot of feedback about how it went, but that was a tough listen on the other end, because it was like you'd say something and then the point would just go over the head and it would just be arguing another point that wasn't even said about performance and using the ability of like, I rehab this 300 kilo Australian powerlifter and that's why I'm better than you, that sees the everyday person that we all see. It was just crazy. So that kind of stuff was crazy.
It was weird. I was trying so hard to like build bridges and find common ground, and it's just impossible. It's so weird. It's the weirdest thing. It's like someone wanted to hate me. There's nothing I could do.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to, because that podcast you did with E3, I think it was E3, about the kind of strength training as a mediator, getting stronger as a mediator for recovery. That was I think it was E3, wasn't it?
Testing.
Yeah.
It's on strength
it's with
testing.
Chris. He's with E3, but was it an E3 podcast or was it just Chris Houston as his own? I don't know if they're
maybe it was his own. Yeah, I just remember. I'm sure it was, I think I can remember the title, but
it could have been E3.
Yeah, that's such a really good topic, because we don't have any. I mean, you have valve and stuff, and we don't have it in my clinic. But the value of doing that. Like, do you really believe that you get the buy-in from the person? It happens a lot, and that's one of the biggest factors, because that's one of the main arguments that people see it, they see it improve, and even though it's not happening, it's good for them to get stronger.
Yeah, I just think you can see yourself getting stronger because the weight on the bar, the number of calf raises you do. You know what I mean? Like, that's the whole point of tracking. I just don't think it's necessary. I think it certainly does do what they want it to do. My whole point was you just don't have to. Don't feel like you're being left behind because you don't have the equipment, because you don't need it to do all those things. I say all that, and I like to track my vertical jump.
I mean, I like it because sometimes patients aren't in the gym and they aren't putting weight on a barbell to be able to track that they're lifting heavier or doing more. And, if patients are coming in and perhaps they need something to buy into my recommended intervention, which is some form of exercise-based therapy, I think it's a really good avenue for them seeing that there's ongoing benefit to it. And perhaps if that correlates with their improvement in symptoms, then maybe it will have some long-term change to their lifestyle. That's how I think of it. But I've worked in places where I haven't had access to the testing equipment, and now I do. And I do feel like I benefit a lot from it, and I think my patients do. But that's probably more so the way that I use it. And then like in some athletic rehab, like ACL rehab, being able to assess the differences in strength between sides in quads and hamstrings, I think is really valuable and an important measure of, their readiness to return to sport and high-speed running. So I see a lot of use in it. I think there's other ways that you can do it as well, but I really like it.
Well, I mean, the ACL is the strongest case for it, for sure.
Yeah.
Although it is really interesting, the French research where they use 60% LSI as the cutoff to start return to running. And they said, there were more re-injuries if they didn't meet it. But then there was a huge number of people who were under 60% and still did fine with their run program.
Yeah.
So that's a neat study. They kind of acknowledged like the debate. It was nice to see that in a paper. But again, I think ACL is like the strongest case to do it, because it's such, it seems to be a mediator of recovery. And so
Post-operatively.
Yeah.
Like I think like Achilles Achilles rehab after an Achilles reconstruction, ACL, any kind of knee surgery, even someone that has like had a total knee replacement as well. I think there's value in it. So yeah, I like.
You would see that asymmetry anyway when they've had an operation. They're like, can you lift your leg? No, that's asymmetrical. Let's get you lifting.
Yeah, showing them the numbers and them seeing the graph, I feel like that visual representation of the difference.
But that's what I want to know. Is that just because you think that? Or does a patient actually be like, holy crap, this is really meaningful to me? Or do we just think it because it looks cool? That's what I want the data on.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like say, so an initial consult, I won't do any strength testing because I haven't set them up in the program yet, and it just is a bit time consuming in an initial consult. And so I might say to them like, this is what we're going to do, and then then the follow-up consult will do the testing and show them, and they do seem like quite amazed at how much of a deficit they might be dealing with. So I don't know, but yeah, it could
Do
be.
you use any tools, Greg? Are you a tool man? You got your little instrument or anything like that?
No,
Just
but I
these
have
hands,
all the strength.
magic
I have
hands.
lots of strength testing equipment. I just don't use it.
Mm-hmm.
But I have that stuff. So I've used it all in the past, and I was like, I don't need it. But I totally see why I use it, and I don't have any issues with that. My whole thing was just like, you don't have to.
Yeah,
Totally
I agree
can
with
if you
what you
want to.
said though, in that you're like, I know in my head I'm going to go down a strength training pathway.
Yeah.
That's going to happen regardless of what it tells me. But then like another example that I think of is someone with maybe some like subacromial shoulder pain and testing rotator cuff strength between sides, and maybe they do have a more obvious deficit in say external rotation, whereas someone who's just got a globally sore weak shoulder and it's much the same across the board, then I might go more of a just like comprehensive upper body strength training program versus more specific in someone who has a more notable deficit. And I don't know if that's something that is evidence-based or necessary, but I think there's enough information that's been sort of presented to me from their testing that might indicate that that's a problem that they might benefit from being worked on.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Sure. You're going to help
Now-
people. Don't worry.
To finish up, we always ask these two questions to people. First one is, if you could interview anyone on Earth, doesn't have to be health related, who would it be? And then secondly, if you could have any research funded, ethics is out the window, have as many people as you want, you can do anything that you want for as long as you want, and you just get it done, what would it be?
Oh, yeah. You guys sent me those. I didn't even think about them.
I think who was the last person said Jesus as a joke. Before that was Donald Trump, and then before that was Jackie Robinson.
You know what? I really don't care. There's no one. I don't mean to be. I thought about it a little bit. I'm like, I don't fuck. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't really. So if there's someone that I'd be interested in, I really don't want to meet them because it might ruin it because they're an asshole or they're not as interesting. And then I'm just. I don't know. Maybe I'm. Yeah. I don't care.
That's a good answer.
I don't care about other people. I guess. Yeah, I know. I was walking in with my daughter to like an outdoor store the other day in the summer. Someone stopped us. They're like, hey, sir, can you tell us if you had any superpower, what would it be? And I said, I just wish I could just make the vast majority of people not exist. Meaning like, I just want to be alone. But that's what I meant to say. I just really want to be alone. But then I realized I was asking like just to cull a massive, I was like Thanos. And I'm like, I'm a sociopath. I didn't mean it like that, but that's how it came out.
That's so funny. That is
like,
true.
no, you probably are. So
I thought you were.
To go to the next question, you know what I like? My old research when I did have a small research program was all little studies. I actually like really little tiny studies that no one would ever fund or get money, like want to fund it, just based on all of the little things that people say every day in the clinic that aren't supported. Things like if you get your glutes to fire more, it'll take the stress off your calves. Just things like that you hear all the time, you know. And this has actually been tested. But like if your hip flexors are tight, so if we loosen those, you'll have more hip extension or greater glute power, or you'll be able to access your glutes. It's all those little things. You know, like I love that type of stuff where it's really inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, but it's tiny little things that people always say. I'd love to.
I like that.
Those are the studies I like. Love my old research program. This is one thing I'm reading a lot about. I thought a long time ago to train your anterior core, you could just do like cable punches and squats and deadlifts. And then I did a few little studies we didn't publish. And I didn't see a lot of ab activity, but I see people say it all the time now that to train your abs, you just need to lift heavy or do front squats or do pull-ups. And I'm like, I don't think so. But I've never seen anyone really test that appropriately. So I'd want to do that. Or, people hate stretching when it comes to the tendon. And I'd love to like really do a good stretching protocol versus a heavy resistance program for it. I just want to test all the dogma that has actually become accepted in the profession. That's what I'd like to do.
Yeah,
but I know they're inconsequential and it's not going to save anyone's life. So I'm like, whatever.
They're pretty black and white, like that stretching one, especially for I remember seeing a post, can't remember who it was, it's like, stop stretching the lateral hip. I remember doing that from the class, like, well, it's another form of load and they can tolerate it. They're going to have to do it at some point. Yeah. They don't have to stop doing it. So that's funny.
No, that's the IT band stuff where people say, oh, it's a compressive etiology and IT bands aren't tight. So why would you stretch them? Or stretching doesn't change the stiffness. So therefore stretching the IT band is useless for the IT band. And I'm like, you can't make that conclusion just because IT bands don't get tight, which I know. My first blog was in 2011 saying, don't foam roll your IT band. It's not tight and you can't lengthen it. So it's like, I know this stuff, but those arguments don't go together. Who cares if it doesn't get tight? That doesn't mean that stretching may not be helpful or foam rolling may not be helpful. It'd just be helpful for some other mechanism. But anyways, that's another podcast.
Now, for people to find, you will have everything tagged below in the footnotes to your Instagram, your website, and your courses, which we've done 2 out of 3 of them, and we really enjoyed them. But what's coming up this year and next year? You got your online stuff, but you're also doing some more in person as well.
Yeah, always in person. I like the online I view as, because you get the online when you do the in person, right? And I view the online as like, here's all the information. This is how you can get it. Here's the arguments. Here's a bunch of case studies. But I still really like the in-person stuff because it gets the discussions and the details and fundamentals and make sure people get comfortable. So I'm still doing that. I am coming back to Australia next year. It's my favorite.
Newcastle?
Yeah. I could go to Newcastle. Sure.
Yeah, come to Newcastle.
If people want me to. Yeah, that one. I'm updating. I'm changing how it's taught. Again, the learning idea of how to learn something. I'm trying to get we're redoing it, but we're just trying to figure out better ways to do the in-person. But I really think if you do it in person, it should come with an online. Because then because otherwise, there's so much information. No one wants to be lectured at for 12 hours.
Yeah, because your one, because you buy, we bought your one, I think you said you get 2 days access and that's it. Then you have to buy it again. I'm only kidding. Just up your post, which I do agree with. You can't, because people are going to do it at their own leisure, and sometimes it takes a long time to get it, or you do half of it to the other half 6 months later, kind of thing.
Yeah, lifetime access. My lifetime till I'm dead. That's the whole point.
Then you got to rebuy it. That's great.
No, then it disappears. You guys wouldn't have bought. If you did, you guys wouldn't have bought my online course. You would have got it automatically when you took the in-person course.
And what's the other one? The reconsidered one.
You've put out the running one as well.
Yeah, the yellow one.
Yeah, the yellow one. That's right. I like yellow.
That's what I remember. I can't remember the content. The yellow was.
There's a big running group in Newcastle. You could do the running one as well.
Yeah, do the running
one in face to face. Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, we can definitely fill that with runners that want to know more about running, and maybe do the other one for sure.
It's not for runners. Okay.
Clinician.
Yeah. Clinician.
Yeah, I do want to go to Melbourne because Melbourne has the best trampoline parks in the world. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Newcastle has a good one.
Hey, actually, let me correct you on this. This is huge for Newcastle. If you're into trampolining, at Glendale, they are building the biggest trampoline centre in Australia. It's going to be the Olympic one. It's still, I don't know if it'll be done by the time we get here, but this was 2 years ago, and I think they had 5 years to build it at our track. Can swear, because they're going to train for the Olympics and have all the camps here. Because we might be doing some
public access.
Yeah, that's what you need. Old man access.
Yeah, people from Canada get in for free or something like that. I did here. But so that could be on. But anyway, that would be awesome. But yeah, we'll have everything tagged below. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. It's a long one, and we like the nuance and the longer time to have the podcasting way is the way forward, I think. Do you think, compared to Instagram? A bit of both, but this is a conversation so much better.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks, guys.